When I was a boy, I met a statue that laughed at me. I don't mean a special effects laugh or some pranksters recording hidden in the shrubs. I mean the kind of laugh you hear with your whole body, a quick, bright flick of sound that lands where you're already tender, and then takes up residence there. It happened in Baltimore, long before I had a mortgage or a bad back or a line in my brow that looks just like my father's. It happened at Loudon Park Cemetery under a sky the color of a nickel. If you're from Baltimore, you've heard of Black Aggie. The legend floats down block parties and rowhouse stoops, changes shape in the smoke from backyard grills, gets retold between innings of an O's game. Depending on the version, Aggie is a grieving angel who opens her eyes at midnight, a guardian who gathers the dead for a congress, or a jealous watcher who'll take your life inside 2 weeks if you fall asleep in her arms. Ask 4 people where the statue stands and you'll get 5 different directions. Ask for the real story and you'll get a shrug and a wink. Baltimore folks know how to embroider the truth until it looks festive enough to wear to church. My mother, Lorraine, embroidered better than anyone I knew. We didn't live near Druid Ridge, where the actual grief statue drew its myths like copper draws lightning. We lived closer to Irvington, and most Sundays after Mass we drove to Loudon Park to visit my grandparents. My mother loved the cemetery the way some people love boardwalks. She said the quiet made her think and the stones told her how to listen. Standing over the Hale family plot with the Ford ticking behind us, she'd lower her voice and tell me she had eyes in the back of her head and a friend in the glen. That angel with the book, she'd say, sweeping her arm toward a statue perched on an incline, is the real Black Aggie. She keeps the rude in line. There was a name carved into the base of that statue, Krug, that my brother Joe once told me was short for Kruger because he knew I was terrified of Freddy. Joe liked to needle. He had 3 years on me and could get a laugh out of most rooms just by leaning against a doorframe and breathing cool. When we were young he didn't relish scaring me so much as he relished not stopping others from trying. I don't hold it against him. Most boys learn power as the ability to avoid looking scared. He learned early and well. Our parents had a habit I still don't fully understand. Sometimes, after we'd walked a while among the mausoleums, they'd drop behind, then behind her, then disappear. You know that uncanny moment when conversation fades and you turn, expecting company, and there's only air? That was my mother's favorite moment. She'd tug my father's sleeve, he'd roll his eyes like a man who had surrendered to a wind, and they'd slip away where the path curved and the car sat low behind a swath of hedges. They never really left, not entirely. They'd moved the Ford to where I couldn't see it. Sit there, and wait. When I started to panic, when the breath got small and sharp and my hands went bird-boned, they'd pull up laughing and say, "Now you know how not to wander." By any era's standards, it was a rotten game. The last time they played it, I decided not to give them what they wanted. We were near the angel with the book, the light thin and stubborn through bare branches. My father's silver Ford nosed away with its familiar low growl, and the chrome of the bumper flashed once like a coin tossed in the air and lost in the grass. I felt that awful seesaw in my stomach, the tilt toward tears. Then I told myself no. No more. I turned to the statue instead. The angel's head was tilted as if reading. The book lay open on her lap, its pages carved with a delicacy I only appreciated later. One of her feet peeked from the hem of her robe. Her face wasn't sad in the way we use that word for soap operas and eulogies. It was attentive, like a schoolteacher in the second week of October. I stood on the slope and, because I was 12 and loneliness comes out sideways at 12, I blurted, "Black Aggie is beautiful." The laugh arrived like a pin dropped in a silent church. It wasn't in my head. I've had booming head noise since I turned 40, pulses of worry that sound like somebody rattling the kitchen drawers, but this was outside me. A quick, high giggle, very close and nowhere. I spun and saw only stone and ivy, the neat domes of family plots, small lambs at the foot of old headstones, and the long backs of marble benches. I ducked behind a monument that belonged to someone else's story. Nobody there. I called, "Joe?" The answer was wind. In horror movies, a boy alone in a cemetery thinks of monsters. I thought of my brother whispering Kruger and of the dwarves from Phantasm knocking their heads together behind every slab. Then I saw her. She was down in the glen, a woman in a dark robe with a hood that cast her face into deliberate shadow. She wasn't a cutout against the trees, she had weight and wrongness and familiarity. I should have run. Instead, I felt like you do when you walk into a room a split second before a glass falls off the counter, alert but not afraid, like something has given you just enough warning to move without shame. I breathed. She turned, slow, and I had that ridiculous lightning bolt thought that strikes boys whose voices haven't yet committed to being low: she's pretty. I followed. Of course I did. She moved like an old habit, simple, as if she'd been walking down that hill longer than the city had been called Baltimore. When I reached the bridge, the stone one over the little creek that liked to pretend it was a river after storms, the shadow had slipped out of sight. Another sound, another flick of laughter, this time from beneath. There was a dry ledge under the bridge. If I crouched there, I couldn't be seen from the path. I understood that immediately, as if someone had leaned close and explained the geometry to me in a language I'd known since birth. I felt, for the first time in my life, the heady thrill of being the one who disappears. I waited under the bridge for 20 minutes. I heard crows. I heard a distant car door. Eventually, my mother's voice floated down the glen, aggrieved and astonished by turns. When I came out, she shouted the whole ride home. That night, with my face in the pillow and a moon the color of dishwater showing through the blinds, I whispered, "Thank you," to no one, and felt watched in a way that didn't make my skin crawl. It was not the last time I saw her. 2 years later, on Halloween, I was on my own for the first time. No adult supervision, a pillowcase for candy, and the sweaty freedom of a rubber mask that made my face smell like a basement. I ran until my breath felt hot in my throat, then ran some more. Somewhere near 10, I bumped into Joe and his girlfriend, Tasha, under a street lamp that gave everyone movie star cheekbones. Joe's friends Ricky and Mark were with them, both long-limbed and loud, all appetite and no brakes. They teased and shoved and bragged the way boys do when they think they'll never die. When Ricky suggested we cut through Loudon Park to get home, my brother looked at me for a fraction of a second. The look said, "They're going to try something." The look said, "You game?" I nodded. "Let's go show them Black Aggie," I said, casual, and the air around us cooled by 10 degrees. There's nothing more theatrical than the jump from streetlight to cemetery dark. We slipped through a hole in the wrought iron fence and the city fell away as if we'd closed a door behind us. The night was blacker than TV dark. It had weight. Tasha stayed close to Joe. Ricky and Mark snorted bravado and exhaled cold fog. I peeled off toward the trees. The glen provides a shortcut if you know which routes to trust. As I passed the bridge I felt it. The heaviness, that not quite welcome, like walking into your childhood home and realizing it has been staged for sale. Not hostile. Not friendly. "What are you doing here?" with no question mark. I kept moving anyway, keeping my sneakers light on the pine needles, and reached the statue with the book before the others. I crouched behind an old stone, my pulse bucking, and waited. Their voices came first, then the scuff of shoes. Joe said, "Our mom swears this is the real one." Ricky laughed, bold as brass in the wrong church. He stepped close, too close, and said something crude to the angel about the soft marble of her mouth. I reached around the monument and grabbed his ankle. I'd painted my face pale and darkened my eyes with makeup borrowed from my sister's drawer. When I groaned, it sounded like it came from someplace older than my voice. Ricky yelped, stumbled, and fell hard on his tailbone, which got me a private satisfaction I still revisit on bad days. Tasha screamed and then laughed because she couldn't help it. Joe laughed openly. Mark tried to laugh and made a noise like a man discovering he can't. Ricky scrambled up with rage that didn't fit his face and charged. I ran. I cut down past the mausoleum that looked like a small church that had been handed to a child and carried a block, the scale slightly off, the windows too mournful. Moonlight laid a sleeve across the stone. Just before I reached the corner I saw a shape pass behind the glass, a shadow crossing an interior that should have been empty. I had a choice, take the main path toward the gate, or veer into the deeper dark of the glen and aim for the bridge. If you're wondering why I didn't choose the path, you haven't been a 13-year-old boy. Some choices are courage and some are pride disguised as courage. I turned into the bower and ran hard. Under the bridge was the same dry ledge as before. I slid down the bank, tore my knee on something that bit without teeth, and wedged myself beneath the stone. The boys thundered up, then faltered. They muttered bravado that sounded like a bad speaker turned too low. One of them said, "What is that?" in a whisper shaped like prayer. Then their footsteps fled the way only young legs can flee, fast and without dignity. I waited until their noise had folded back into the night. And I smiled because I was 13 and I had one. When I climbed the bank, water soaked my jeans from someplace I hadn't noticed, and the cold ran down into my socks like the old creek had decided it wanted my feet after all. I was already grinning when I saw her. She stood by the bridge, a hooded figure cut from the same dark as the trees. A street light from the road beyond framed her with a thin rim of dull fire. The moon had climbed and fattened and looked, from where I stood, like it had been hammered from tin. The figure didn't move. The wrongness I'd felt before wasn't abstract anymore. It was personal. I should say that clearly. I felt seen and weighed. Not like a fish on a line, but like a student caught copying the answer to a question he should have known. Anger rolled off her, slow and cold. It didn't sit on me exactly, it sat around me, a room suddenly smaller than it had a right to be. My breath went narrow. My legs flattened into a boy's vague idea of legs. I wanted to move. I couldn't. She raised her head. Two red eyes looked out from under the hood. I know the legend. I know what's theater and what's electricity and what's my own brain finding a tune to hum so the silence won't be absolute. But don't ask me to explain this. I have tried to reason my way through it for 3 decades, and the truth is a small rock I carry at the bottom of my pocket. I can touch it without taking it out. I can feel its shape. I can't show it to you. Those eyes were there and they were angry, and I knew with the same certainty winter is coming in late October that the anger wasn't about boys being boys or pranks getting out of hand. The anger was older and narrower and had my name shaped into its center. Dan. My brother's voice came thin and far over the mausoleum, over the path, the kind of voice a person uses when he's pretending not to be worried anymore because pretending has quit. The red eyes didn't blink. I thought, wildly, she's mad because I took her kindness and made it my weapon. I used the hideaway to vanish others the way I had been vanished. I took what had been shown to me as mercy and pressed it into fear. The revelation wasn't moral so much as physical. It struck in the chest. It made tears out of air. I felt suddenly very small, the way a boy feels when he sees the full scale of the stage he's playing at and realizes the theater is on fire. The spell broke like a plate dropped from a height. One frame she filled my vision, the next there was just the scrape of water and an owl and the ache in my knee where the creek had taken a little. The figure had gone or had never been. Decide what you like. I scrambled toward the path. Joe. I shouted, and his answer came fast, closer, the sound of a brother who has discovered the limits of cool. We left together. The other boys had bolted to the fence and wriggled through and were probably already laughing too loud at their relief. Before we went, I climbed back up the incline to the angel with the book. I don't know why I did it. I only know that some apologies require a position. I bent and kissed the marble foot that peeks from under the robe. My lips came away chalk dry. Joe stared at me like I had reached into an electrical socket and intentionally taken the shock. Don't do that, he said. Ever. I told him I wouldn't. I meant it and didn't. When you're 13, ever is a word you say to make adults calm enough to let you go. I wish I could tell you the story ends there because endings make us brave. We can walk away from the page, wash our hands, tell ourselves we've kept our bargains. But life doesn't often honor the stories need to conclude. What I can tell you is this: I have seen her 2 more times in the years since, and each time it came not in the middle of spectacle but just before I did something I'd have to live with. The first time I was 23 and angry in a way that felt noble until I tasted it. My boss had dressed me down in front of a customer, not entirely without cause. After hours I skulked back toward the warehouse, full of plans shaped like payback. There's a small bridge near the loading dock where a drainage ditch pretends to be somebody else's problem. The light there is bad and the wind slouches against the building like a man who overpromised. I was almost over the water when I felt the air go thin. A woman in a hood stood at the far end, just inside the light circle. I didn't see red. I didn't need to. I walked home with my hands empty. The next morning I apologized instead of arming myself. The second time I was 37 and thought I was alone enough to be careless with a stranger's heart. The bar on Eastern had a corner where the overhead
bulbs missed and the music felt like a slow bruise. I was chatting with a woman who wore a ring she twisted when she laughed. I wasn't going to do anything you could prosecute. I was going to do something I would regret. I went to the restroom, looked up from the sink, and the small mirror showed me the empty stall behind me and, impossibly, the corner by the door where a hooded figure stood that wasn't there when I turned. I went home alone and called an old friend I'd wronged a decade earlier and left a message saying I remembered. Some debts wait until you age enough to do the math. I don't play the underbridge trick anymore. I don't tease fear out of people just to make sure I'm not the only one who has to feel it. The older I get, the more I understand what a poor currency fear is. It never buys what you think you're purchasing. I learned this in a cemetery and in a warehouse and in the short middle years of my own house, where my wife once fell asleep to a home improvement show while our dog breathed warm at my feet and a draft moved the kitchen door just enough to make me check the latch twice. When I visit Loudon Park now, I park in the wide part of the lane and walk slow. The angel with the book is still there. The word Krug hasn't changed. The book's marble pages still catch the light like pewter. I stand a few minutes and think of my mother, who believed stories ought to teach you something even if the method stung. I think of my father's reluctant laughter, the way he would have stopped the game if she'd asked him to, and the way he didn't because she didn't. Family is a collection of habits you inherit the way you inherit bone structure. Somewhere in there, you decide which ones you'll keep. I don't know what happens when we die. I have seen the minds of confident men buckle when confronted with small endings. The end of a job, the end of a marriage, the end of believing you're the kind of person who would never do the thing you just did. I suspect a real ending would be too bright to look at directly. I suspect, too, that if the hooded figure is waiting for me at the last turn, she isn't waiting like a hangman. I think she's a watcher. I think she's the sort of stern mercy you only recognize when you've used up your inventory of shortcuts. People ask if I ever went back under the bridge. I did twice, for reasons that didn't involve hiding. Once to pull a boy out who had slipped and bruised his ribs, once to collect a grocery cart the creek had decided to keep. Both times the air under the stone felt smaller than before, as if the space had taken the measure of my footsteps and adjusted itself to a size appropriate to the man I'd become. Both times the sun came back strong as soon as I stepped clear. I still live within a day's drive of Baltimore. When I tell this story, someone always says their version of Aggie opened her eyes in a different cemetery, or that it was their uncle who slept in her lap and woke with frost in his hair, or that they ran around Druid Ridge as kids playing tag and never saw a thing they couldn't explain. I don't argue. My mother taught me not to shame a good legend for wearing the wrong dress. But I correct the part people always want to fix for me. They say I'm telling a ghost story, as if the point is the red eyes or the laugh or the fact that a boy can be so hungry for kindness that he kisses a statue's foot. I tell them no. It's a story about not repeating harm just because it fits your hand. It's about learning to stop the chain where it enters you. It's about turning away from the version of yourself who believes love is just the absence of being abandoned. Sometimes, when I leave the cemetery, I glance back. I don't expect to see the hood. I don't expect to see anything. I look anyway, the way you check the stove 3 times before heading out. And the wind comes up, and the pages of the marble book brighten for an instant, and the bench nearby looks more like a pew than a seat. I nod without meaning to. Whatever the figure is, whatever it wanted from a boy who misused a gift, I hope it sees a man who tries to pay his debts. If you've stayed with me this long, here's what I'll leave you with. When you feel the old temptation to vanish someone, to make them small as you felt when you were small, try standing under a bridge without the urge to disappear. Try staying in the open when you want most to hide. Try learning the difference between a warning and a threat. Warnings are mercies dressed in gray. I don't promise Aggie will come if you call. I don't recommend you try. But if you do hear laughter in the cold, and you're not sure whether it's for you or at you, I suggest you answer with something better than a prank. You might not get red eyes. You might get nothing at all. You might get the quiet you need to choose. And if one day a figure waits for you at the bend in the road you can't see past yet, I hope you'll be able to meet the gaze with both hands empty. I've told you my version. Now I'd like to hear yours. Have you seen people use fear as a toy, the way my parents did, the way I tried to? What do you think a community owes its children in terms of kindness? And what do we do about the ugly inheritance of cruelty we pass around like hand-me-downs? Speak your mind in the comments. If you believe some violence is just how it's always been, say so and tell us why. If you think we can do better, and how, make your case. Take a stand. Stories are how we argue our way toward justice. This one is mine. I'm listening for yours.